I'd like to submit a statement to you. How do you feel about that? Do you agree or do you disagree? Well, now, let me submit one more thing to you. The pineapple. A seemingly innocent enough yellow fruit. The sun is shining, the birds are chirping, and the world is at peace. But watch what happens when I introduce yet another element into play. That was nuts. Why are pineapples so divisive on pizza? I mean, where do your allegiances lie? Are you pineapple gang for life or are you on team traditional? Well, I asked a group chat that I'm in to see where people kind of stacked up here. Thanks, Nate, for being such a good sport. So if we have one person that would say that putting pineapple on pizza is crazy, and we have another person that's saying that it wouldn't be crazy, then the question is, who is crazy? Well, as I suggested before, no one is crazy. And today I'd like to tell you about a few things that will hopefully make you feel better about the decisions that you make with your own money and be less judgmental of other people with the decisions that they make with theirs. And maybe, just maybe, that will extend to pizza topping choices too. 1 divided by 8 billion is 1.25 e to the negative 10, or otherwise written as 0.0000000000125. As a percentage, this would be 0.00000000125%. This infinitely small number represents you. Yes, you, and that's because it represents your experiences in your life relative to everyone else on Earth and their experiences. And yet, this extremely small sliver of experience that you've had relative to everyone else probably makes up the majority of the way that you think the world actually works. The last recession in Australia before COVID was in 1990, 30 years without a single recession. The last recession in America before COVID was in 2008. The one before that was in 2001. And the one before that was in 1990. So a 30-year-old person who was born, raised, and then lived their entire life in Australia would have had a completely different experience than someone who was born, raised, and lived in America for 30 years. The 30-year-old in Australia would have experienced something that no 30-year-old American ever has. 25 years after the Great Depression, John F. Kennedy was running for president. At one point, he was asked by a reporter what he remembered from the Depression. This is what he said: "I have no first-hand knowledge of the Depression. My family had one of the great fortunes of the world, and it was worth more than ever then. We had bigger houses, more servants, we traveled more. About the only thing that I saw directly was when my father hired some extra gardeners just to give them a job so that they could eat. I really did not learn about the Depression until I read about it at Harvard." So this was a major point of contention in the 1960 election, and that's because people were saying, and rightfully so, that how could you possibly be in charge of the entire economy if you don't have a realistic experience of how the Depression affected the majority of Americans at the time? But JFK did have one other point of experience over and above his opponent, and that's because he had experience in World War II. I don't know about you, but I definitely was not alive in the 1930s, and if you were, and you're watching this, then I mean, hey, that's pretty cool because you're way outside my usual demographic, but I'm so happy that you're here and watching this, and definitely do not feel like you don't belong here, because you do. And secondly, I would want you to know that no matter how much I learn about the Depression, no matter how much I try and keep an open mind about what those experiences would have been like, I can in no way, shape, or form know what it would have truly been like to go through that type of experience in the same way that you would if you actually lived it. Me, I go to bed every night with a lot of my money invested in the stock market and I sleep like a baby. But imagine somebody who lost their life savings in the stock market in a big downturn, or maybe they took on a really risky investment and it went south. And then imagine that they had to go home to their partner and their kids and tell them that their future wasn't going to be what they thought it was going to be. That person is going to have a completely different conception of what the stock market is than I do. They might look at somebody like me and think, man, what are you doing? Are you crazy? Get your money out of there. But remember, no one is crazy. We all just have different experiences that lead to our decision making. If you were born in 1970, the S&P 500 increased almost 10 times over adjusted for inflation as you grew into your teenage years and then into your 20s. Chances are, if this was you, you'd be looking pretty fondly upon the stock market. But if you were born in 1950, the stock market stayed completely flat after you adjust for inflation as you also aged into your 20s. These years as a teenager and then moving into your 20s are extremely important in your life because they're very formative years about when you start to kind of conceptualize how you think that the world actually works. So when you have two distinct groups of people, one group where the stock market performed extremely well, and then another group where it basically stayed completely flat after you adjust for inflation, you'd have two groups of people who think about the stock market in completely different ways just based off of the luck of the draw of when they were actually born. For me, pretty much the entire time that I've been an investor in the stock market has been in one of the greatest bull runs that we have experienced in history. So if you ask me if I like the stock market, my answer is going to be hell yeah, I do. But ask the person who started investing in 2000 or 2008, and I think you'll get a completely different answer. As I continue to expand my knowledge of investing in personal finance, I'm trying to be very cognizant of this bias I have based on my own experiences in the stock market. And I mean, look, one of the reasons why it might seem like people do silly things with their money is because the entire concept of modern personal finance is extremely new. At the end of 2018, there was $27 trillion in retirement accounts in the United States. This huge sum of money makes up the main concerns of everyday investors like you and me. But did you know that the actual concept of retirement is only a few generations old at most? You see, life expectancy wasn't that high up until recently, so for the most part, people were expected to work until the day that they croaked. If you look at the percentage of men who participated in the labor market who were above the age of 65, you can see that the majority were still working for much of their recent history. The concept of retirement was so new that the country couldn't quite figure out how to manage it properly at first. According to the Census Bureau, more than a quarter of Americans over age 65 were living in poverty until the late 1960s. And you know when you hear people say things like, man, I miss the good old days when everybody had a really solid pension provided by their employer. But in reality, pensions back in the day weren't quite as good as people tend to remember them to be. According to the Employee Benefit Research Institute, only a quarter of those aged 65 or older had pension income in 1975. And among these lucky individuals who had a pension, only 15% of their household income actually came from the pension. So in reality, the idea of retirement didn't really hit the mainstream until around the 80s, when it started to become more of the common thought that people should be able to enjoy their golden years in life after working a hard life. And guess what year the 401k was invented? 1978. How about the Roth IRA? 1998. I am older than the Roth IRA. These seemingly essential retirement investment accounts are not old. They are very, very new in our modern financial world, just like the idea of retirement. As a walking, talking, and debatably intelligent ape, humans have a long history spanning millions of years. But our modern financial world only sprang to life in the last 50 or so. So to say that we should have perfect financial habits and understand all the intricacies of personal finance, I think is a bit ridiculous. We are all so new to this, and to expect anything else, I think, does us a great disservice. So we all might make silly decisions from time to time with our money, and perhaps in large part because of the experiences that we've had in our lives in regard to money. So the next time you think that you're doing something stupid with your money, or I'm doing something stupid with your money, just take a second to remember that you or that person is probably making that decision because it makes sense to them in this very moment based off of how they've experienced money in their life thus far. You, me, and the rest of society, we're all so new to money that we're basically still winging it. So to end this video, I would just like to say, keep an open mind, continue to learn as much as you possibly can, and always remember, no one is crazy.